evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to AIJAC Live Online. It's great to have you with us tonight. I'd like to make a special mention to our Facebook audience and to our international audience. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. A quick flip to Israel, to Shmuel. How are you, Shmuel? Good to see you.
I'm great. Good morning from Tel Aviv.
Great to see you. Chag Pesach Sameach, and I hope all is well. Looking forward to your presentation tonight. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the process of finalizing the details of our next webinar. We will definitely be in touch, so please check your inboxes and be on the lookout for an invitation that will hit your inbox very shortly. As usual, tonight's webinar will have a moderated Q&A at about the halfway mark. We utilize the raised hand feature inside Zoom. I'll go through the finer details, but please, during the presentation, have a think of some questions to ask Shmuel. You can also ask in the chat feature inside Zoom if you're camera shy as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to our main event. Shmuel Rosner is a Tel Aviv-based author, columnist, editor, and expert observer of Israeli society. He's a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, an analyst for Kan News, Israel's public broadcast company, contributing opinion writer for the International New York Times, senior political editor for the Jewish Journal, and columnist for Israel's Maariv. Shmuel has been widely published internationally and in Israel, and has written for many prestigious publications, including Slate, Foreign Policy, Commentary, The New Republic, the Jewish Review of Books, Moment, and of course, the Israeli-Israel Review. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's topic is Israel has voted, what now? I'd like to now hand over to AIJAC's Executive Director, Dr. Colin Rubenstein, to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Joel, and welcome everybody to this post-Israel election analysis by our very special guest, Shmuel Rosner. Shmuel, as Joel said, Tel Aviv-based, is a very well-credentialed and highly distinguished commentator, especially on Israeli society and politics. So we now are in a situation, yes, Israel has voted, but what now? And I think most of us see, that's probably true in Israel too, what we have is the anticipated stalemate. So one of the most likely outcomes, if not the most likely, is possibly a fifth election later on this year. But wait, maybe there are other alternatives. Maybe Prime Minister Netanyahu can cobble together yet another coalition, or perhaps an anti-Netanyahu bloc can cobble together a coalition, or maybe there's something else. Indeed, there are so many fascinating and indeed new aspects to this election, and some of them actually very positive, as I'm sure we'll hear, that we're preoccupied at the moment with the familiar horse trading that's going on and will last for quite some time, one suspects, in trying to form this government. So many questions are being asked. I'm sure our guest of honor tonight will be able to answer most of them, if not all of them, and that you, the audience, are going to pose some other corkers and difficult questions that he'll have to grapple with, but I'm sure he'll give us a very good accounting. So Shmuel, we're all on the edge of our seats and looking forward to what you've got to say to enlighten us about this fascinating election. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and Chag Pesach Sameach again. Unfortunately, you said I could answer most questions and possibly all questions. I think the one question you want to answer for, that's the one I can't answer. And that is what's going to happen next. I can probably give you some possibilities and maybe even attribute probabilities to some of these possibilities. But to give you an exact answer on what's going to happen in Israel in the coming weeks and months is impossible for anyone. I should mention I've been watching Israeli elections as a journalist, both an editor and a writer, for many years now, and especially from my days as a news editor. I was once a chief news editor for a daily newspaper, and one learns to know that the weeks between election day and a forming of a new government are the weeks in which you can least believe any politician. Politicians, to begin with, are not always truth tellers. You can't always trust every word that they say. But in the weeks between election, they're forming a coalition. It's really all smoke screens and manipulations and behind the scenes negotiations, and no one is telling you the exact truth about what's going to happen. So I'll start with that, and I'll say that, basically we have three main options for the coming month. One of them is for a coalition headed by Prime Minister Netanyahu to form. Another one is for a coalition by someone other than Netanyahu to form. And the third option, unfortunately, that is the one that seems more likely for now, or most likely for now, is to have a fifth election in less than 3 years. And if we have such election, there's also a question of when exactly this is going to happen, when clearly the Likud Party and Prime Minister Netanyahu would like it to happen as soon as possible, maybe in August or September. And for other parties in the Knesset, it's better to have these elections slightly later on the calendar, maybe in October or early November, because at that time, according to the ancient coalition agreement from a year and a half ago, Benny Gantz is supposed to jump into the role of prime minister if no coalition is formed. If we are in a situation in which we have an interim government from now until the end of October, then at least, there will be some judicial debate about this, but at least according to an agreement, Benny Gantz is supposed to replace Netanyahu as prime minister automatically. And that's a scenario that Mr. Netanyahu would like to avoid. Now, let me jump back to the election. Okay, what happened at the election? First of all, the number of people, or the share of people who voted in this election, was slightly lower, but not much lower than in previous elections. Most people who didn't come to vote were Arab Israelis. The Arab Israeli representation was at a peak 2 years ago with 15 members of Knesset. In this election, many Arab voters decided to stay on the sidelines and decided not to vote. There are two main reasons for this. One is that they weren't happy with the split of the main Arab party. The joint list could not hold all its parts, all its components together, and many Arab voters were frustrated by this fact. And the other thing was the fact that although in previous elections it seemed as if the Arab Party can play a real major role in deciding who's going to be the prime minister and maybe even take part in the coalition, all these hopes crashed ultimately, and the joint list did not play any major role in Israel's continuous stalemate. So many Arab voters say, well, our vote doesn't matter anyhow, so we might as well stay home. As for the results, a few things are worthy of mentioning. One is the number of parties that crossed the electoral threshold in Israel. We have an electoral threshold of 3.25%, which means that to get into the parliament, to get into the Knesset, you must cross the threshold. In previous elections, the number of parties basically declined from year to year since we raised the bar. We raised the bar 6 or so years ago, and the number of parties declined as a result. But in this election, many small-sized parties could cross the threshold. So we have a parliament of 13 parties. That's much too many parties for anyone to have to deal with, but that's the number we have in this Knesset. Factions who could not hold together, like the Arab Party that split into two different parties, but also parties on the left like Labor and Meretz that run together for a few elections and now split, and other parties. So we have a variety of many small parties rather than having two main blocks supported by two big parties. The largest party by far in this election is the Likud Party. More than 1 million Israelis voted for Likud. It will have 30 seats in the Knesset, and this is the main party. The second largest party is Yesh Atid, centrist party led by member of Knesset Yair Lapid, former finance minister, former member of a Netanyahu coalition, but a leader who vowed never to sit under Netanyahu again. He refused to sit under Netanyahu in the previous election, and that's why Blue and White had to split. And he decided not to sit under him this time. So he is maneuvering in an attempt to be the alternate or the alternative prime minister to Netanyahu. But both Lapid and Netanyahu basically have the same problem. There are many parties in the Knesset, but there is no coalition. There isn't a block of 61 members ready to support any specific coalition that we can count. What are the numbers? Netanyahu can count for sure on about 52 seats. If you add to this the Yamina party, a right-wing religious party headed by Naftali Bennett, he can go up to 59 seats, which still leaves him too short of the majority he needs for a majority, for a Knesset majority. For this, he can do one of two basic things. He can try to lure in one of the smaller parties, and the party everybody is talking about is the small Arab Islamist party, Ra'am. That's the party that decided before the election that it will negotiate with anyone, and maybe, there is a possibility of this party joining a coalition and making it a 63-seat coalition. But this will be a strange scene to see a right-wing prime minister supported by a right-wing, and some would even claim radical right-wing parties and ultra-Orthodox parties, and one Arab Islamist party that can basically make or break this coalition. The other option for Netanyahu is to look for other members of Knesset that will abandon their own parties and join him. All he needs are 2 members of Knesset, 2 or 3 members of Knesset. If he can lure members from Tikva Chadasha, the right-wing party headed by Gidon Sa'ar, or from the Blue and White, that was one of the surprises in this election and has more seats than expected. If he can find such 2 or 3 people to lure into his coalition, then again, he can form a fragile, narrow, but still a majority with which to rule Israel. The other option for Israel is a very complicated coalition whose main message will be anything but Prime Minister Netanyahu. This will be a coalition that the 3 main pillars of it will be the 3 politicians, Gidon Sa'ar from Tikva Chadasha, Yair Lapid from Yesh Atid, and Naftali Bennett from Yamina, and they will have to decide which way to go with it. They can go all the way to the left and maybe even use the Arab parties to form a coalition that has no ideological common ground except for wanting to get rid of the prime minister, or they can try to convince the ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and Yahadut HaTorah, United Torah Judaism. They can try to convince these 2 parties that a 5th election is one too many, and maybe these parties will agree to form still a right-wing Orthodox coalition, but with some elements from the center or center-left, such as Blue and White and Yesh Atid, and possibly maybe the Labour Party as well, but they will keep the Arab parties outside of the coalition, and Meretz, the left-wing party Meretz outside of the coalition, and the anti-Haredi party, Israel-Palestinian, also outside of the coalition. So we can see two basic options for the no-Netanyahu coalition. One, the more likely, the more viable is a right-wing Haredi coalition. The other one, less likely but not impossible, a coalition from right to the radical left and to the non-Zionist Arab parties, whose only goal is to say, we are here, we are forming a coalition for a year or so to unseat Netanyahu, take care of some important and urgent business connected to the to COVID-19 and to economic problems. And that's the only common ground that we can find by which to form such coalitions. So these are the options, and the other option is fifth election. Since we do not have a clear path for any coalition that will be both ideologically coherent, relatively easy to form, and an expression of the clear expression of the will or the wishes of the majority, then maybe our only way out of this is to have yet another round in which we can hope that, you know, when you roll the dice time and again, maybe someday someone is going to hit the jackpot, and then we can have a real coalition. It's really rolling the dice. And why do I say that? Because we see that in the last 3 years, the contours of the two main blocks remain the same. You know, there are many intra-political maneuvers, and small parties are fighting one another, and parties do cross or do not cross the threshold. But the basic features of the two main blocks, the bloc that supports Prime Minister Netanyahu and the bloc that opposes him, these two blocks did not change much in the last 3 years. And that's why we find ourselves time and again in this situation of not even 60-60, more like a 58-58 or 59-57, with an additional party that would not join any of the coalitions. So this is where we find ourselves. As to what is the schedule as we move forward. This week is Pesach, so nothing has happened except for things that happen behind the scenes. And I already told you what I think about truth-telling of politicians during such period. I still talk to politicians from time to time, but I tend not to believe any of them. Those of them who tell the truth are the ones who don't know what's really going on, and those of them who know what's going on will not say anything that I can count on. Next week, the Prime Minister of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, is going to summon the heads of all parties and going to question them as to which person they support as Prime Minister. Then he will have to make the decision of who's going to get the first chance at forming a coalition. It's not clear, strategically speaking, it's not even clear if it's better for anyone to get the first chance or wait for a second chance. It's not even clear if Rivlin is going to offer a second chance. There are rumors coming from the president's house that he's going to hand the option to someone, let's say Netanyahu, and then if he fails, Rivlin is not going to appoint anyone. He'll just say, I'm sending this back to the Knesset, and you have a few weeks to see if you can sort it out. And if not, we will automatically go for another round of election. The strategy of the highly frustrated president is not clear at this time. I'm not sure he made his decision. He's probably going to hear the heads of the parties first and only then make his own decision. We should mention that this will be, whatever happens, this will be the last time Rivlin is handing the giving someone the chance to form a coalition. In a few months, Rivlin is supposed to be replaced by someone else. We don't know whom. It's not clear well, the current Knesset is going to elect him, but which coalition, if any, is going to elect the next president is also not certain. So all cards are up in the air. Also, when it comes to the identity of the next president, of course, the next president is not as important as the next prime minister, but it just symbolizes the extent to which Israel is at a limbo and cannot move away from it. Just a few quick notes on things other than politics, because we've been dealing with politics for the last 3 years as if this is the only thing in the world. On ideology, when it comes to ideology, it's important to note that a clear majority of voters voted for right-wing parties. Many of the parties who do not support, this is not, newspapers, they like to present all political fights as fights between the right and the left. This is not a fight between a right and the left. The right wing is clearly the winner of this election. If you take all the parties supportive of Netanyahu and add to these at least two, Tikva Hadasha and Israel Beitenu, then you have a clear majority of right-wing voters in Israel, certainly among Jews, but also in the general population. So this is not a tie between right and left. It's a tie between blocs supporting Netanyahu, and this is a personal thing, not an ideological thing. Now, of course, the personal thing is also a manifestation of some ideological differences concerning things such as the rule of law, such as whether it's necessary to have certain terms for prime ministers beyond which they can no longer serve. It has ideological connotations, but the basic features of ideology in Israel, namely the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israel and Iran, Israel in the Middle East, Israel-US relations, economic issues, all these matters are not under great debate in Israel. The debate in Israel is truly about this personal issue of having or not having the prime minister as prime minister for the next term. Second point, and that's an important point, Israel is getting out of the pandemic. Had we had this election 2 months ago, it's fair to assume that Netanyahu would have been in a much worse situation. But with some luck and some deliberation, he managed to pull it off and get to election day when Israel is getting out of the pandemic. People are getting vaccines in great numbers. One could even say that had it been anyone but Netanyahu, he should have won this election hands down. It should have been easy for him to win this election. He was just made the first world leader to get a country out of the pandemic in such decisive and comprehensive way. And clearly he gets a lot of personal credit for insisting on getting the vaccines fast and first, and trading with the companies in the United States to get the vaccines in exchange for research data. All this package that Netanyahu was able to pull off gives him enormous credit, not just among supporters, but also among some of his opponents. He clearly deserves credit for it. And again, had it been someone else, he should have won hands down this election. My last point will be about the Arabs again. I started by talking about the Arabs, and I think it's an important thing to remember that in the last 4 elections, in the last 2 years or so of election, the situation of Arab Israelis as players in Israeli politics changed dramatically in ways that we could not foresee 3 or 4 years ago. Suddenly, Arab parties are becoming legitimate partners. Arab parties are seen as kingmakers. Even right-wing parties are willing to talk openly about the pros and cons of utilizing Arab friends and Arab leaders to form a majority, partnering with Arab parties, even those with which we have or they have great differences. So it's not clear to me how this vicious cycle is going to end, but I would not be surprised to discover that 100 years from now, historians will look at this period as a watershed moment in Arab-Jewish relations in Israel. It might not be that important which party ultimately wins this election, whether we have 4 or 5 rounds before we get to a conclusion, but the way Arab parties and Arab leaders are getting into the political game and becoming a part of it is dramatic. It's highly surprising. It's positive on many levels, and it didn't yet end. And this is something that people who observe Israel, both from within and from afar, should take note of, because this is an important, not just political, but also social development that could alter the relations between Arabs and Jews in Israel. I suggest to stop here and get questions. And as was said, I will try to answer all of them except the one I can't answer, which is how this will end. So, please.
Thank you, Shmuel. Thank you very much for that. Comprehensive analysis. There's a lot there, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot of questions that can be asked. I'm sure you've got many. Now, utilizing the reactions button at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom program, you'll see a button called reactions. You can raise your hand. That will provide me with a silent notification of your intent to ask a question. I can also take questions in the chat too, which I am going to start off with. Now, I'll paraphrase the question. It's in 2 parts. From the outside, it seems that Israeli democracy is badly broken, and just going to another election doesn't seem to rectify the issue. So the double-barreled question in the chat is Israel largely working without much of a functioning government, so it doesn't really matter? And is there a way to actually fix the core issues that seem so broken?
So the answer is, I'll answer the second question first. There aren't many things that are broken. We are not in a system that is completely broken. We are in a system that's stuck. It's like a pipeline into which a sock in which you have a sock that blocks the water from flowing. And the sock is Prime Minister Netanyahu. As I said, this is a personal question, and I'm not saying it's not an important question, but it's very clear that if we take him out of the equation, and I'm not suggesting this as a remedy for the situation, this is something for the voters to decide. But had we not have Netanyahu as the head of Likud today, forming a coalition would be the easiest task in the history of Israel's politics. We have an issue with a very dominant political figure, very dominant prime minister. Remember that Netanyahu has been with us since he won his first election in 1995. And he's been very dominant for 2.5 decades. And at some point, I assume that he will have to depart but he thinks that it is still too soon for him to depart. And some people think it's much too late for him to depart. And until we resolve this issue, we are stuck. I don't think it's necessary to go from this to the conclusion that the whole system is broken. The system has an issue. If we change it to a different system, we will replace one problem with a different problem. I'm not a huge fan of changing election systems because my experience looking at other countries shows that when you try to resolve one issue, you usually create a different problem. Is our system more broken than the American electoral system that elected Donald Trump to be a president for 4 years? I'm not sure. I'm not sure the situation is that bad. Now, I should also say that although I'm not always pleased with our government, it is a functioning or partially functioning government. The streets are still being cleaned by city councils. The traffic is moving forward. People are going to work. The IDF is guarding the borders. It's not as if the country is not in a complete chaos. If I didn't know there were elections taking place, my life as an Israeli didn't change much in the last 2 years, except for the pandemic, of course, but that's not completely the government's fault. So to say that Israel doesn't have a government, we have a government, it's only half functioning. Maybe this is also a lesson that a half functioning government is sometimes better than a fully functioning government, because it keeps some of the wilder ideas that politicians have at bay. They cannot achieve everything that they want to achieve, and maybe that's better for us, the citizens. Again, I'm not saying Israel doesn't need a government, but I would not panic about the possibility of us having an interim government for another 3 or 4 or 5 months. It's not the ideal solution, but I don't think the country is falling apart, not yet.
Thank you for that, Shmuel. And now I'll hand over to AIJAC's Naomi Levine.
Thanks very much, Shmuel. It was really interesting to hear that you don't think that electoral reform is something that Israel needs to go through. I think from the outside, we're all looking at it and thinking there must be a reform that's needed here. So it's interesting to hear your take. I've got a slightly different angle I wanted to look at and ask you about. What's the significance of extremist Jewish parties like Otzma Yehudit and Noam getting into the Knesset on Israel's, both their internal harmony and also on the international reputation of the Israeli government?
That's a great question. Let me begin, though, with your remark on the electoral reform. I should say that it's not clear to me that I'm in the majority on this question. I think that many Israelis are so frustrated with the current situation that they might say they want government reform. However, last time we tried it, this was in the mid-90s, we tried it for a few years and rushed back to the old system because the new system that was supposed to be better was truly much worse. That was the system that elected first Prime Minister Netanyahu and then Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Both their governments was dysfunctional in many ways. So I don't think electoral reform is the answer to all questions. Now, as to radical right-wing parties, again, there are two things I can say about this. First of all, this is not good for Israel's image abroad. Clearly, to have Jewish extremists as part of the parliament or joining a coalition is not something that's going to help us in European capitals. And it will be a tool used by Israel's many critics and enemies to hammer Israel as much as they can. As for real impact on the policies of Israel, Again, the experience shows that to have one or two members of Knesset from the radical right doesn't alter government policies. It can be on the margins. They can have some small symbolic achievements on this or that matter. But at least up until now, Israeli prime ministers were always, this is not the first time it happens. You know, we had such radicals in the Knesset before, and their impact on government policies on the big issues, whether it's Iran, the Palestinians, relations with the US, relations with the world in general, or for that matter, the economy, they're not going to gain, to get a lot of traction there. Again, some symbolic and truly annoying achievement. That's the price the prime minister and his coalition is going to pay if they need these one or two members of Knesset to join the coalition. But other than that, I don't suspect that this will, you should not expect these radicals to dictate the foreign policy or security policy of Israel in the coming years.
Thank you. Thank you, Shmuel. Very interesting. Now I hand over to AIJAC's Dr. Zvi Fleischer.
Hi, Shmuel. Now, I noticed that the anti-Netanyahu bloc is talking about a very strange idea of passing that could possibly be way out of the deadlock. They're talking about passing a bill stopping someone under indictment from serving as prime minister. And that would have the effect of basically keeping Netanyahu out of being the prime minister, either immediately or after the next election. And then you could theoretically have a party force the Likud to ditch Netanyahu or at least suspend him. And then you could have a coalition that would include Likud without Netanyahu. Do you think that could happen? And is it even possible?
Well, to make it, this is not a new idea. They tried it in the last round of election. The idea is basically for a majority to replace the speaker of the Knesset, then control the schedule of the Knesset, then bring forward a bill denying, basically saying that the president cannot hand the task of forming a coalition to someone who's under indictment, then to go to a fifth round of a coalition because this cannot be retroactive. So you must go for a fifth coalition in such case, unless the Likud Party decides to get rid of Netanyahu. But my assumption that what happens under such scenario is that Likud keeps Netanyahu and he's still running. And if he's winning, he will try to make it a legal case, and he will come forward with this idea that if he got the votes from the clear majority of Israelis, then the court cannot deny him the right to be prime minister. He might try to elect a different speaker and rechange the law and maybe go to a sixth election. So this is a very complicated and tricky political maneuver. I'm not much in favor of deciding who's going to be prime minister by using such technicalities. I would rather have the majority of people decide who's going to be the next prime minister, but that's my personal preference. And for now, we don't see a clear majority for such legislation in the Knesset. For again, the no Bibi faction of the Knesset will need to have at least 61 members supporting such bill. And to do this, they will have to convince at least one Arab party to join in. And it's not clear that they will. So again, it's an option. It's out there. Whether it's going to happen, I can't tell you. Whether I like it or not, I already told you. Whether it will resolve the issue, I'm not sure, and that's why I'm not in favor of the idea.
Thank you for that, Shmuel. I'll now hand over to Ida Lichter. Just going to unmute you there, Ida. click the mute button in the bottom left-hand corner. Beautiful. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your analysis. Regarding Arab politicians, how many would you say are anti-Zionist and subversive of the Jewish state?
Well, the definition of being anti-Zionist is very tricky. I would say that the joint list, the Arab joint list in general, is not Zionist. I would not necessarily call it anti-Zionist, but it's certainly not a Zionist party. I would assume that the Ram party, the Islamist party, is also not Zionist. Some people would argue that there are members of Knesset within the Labor and the Meretz parties who aren't Zionist according to their definitions of Zionism. And then there's the question of the ultra-Orthodox parties, because if you look at United Torah Judaism, they will not call themselves Zionists. Are they in favor of Israel remaining a Jewish state? Probably yes. I assume that their voters certainly want Israel to remain a Jewish state, but the idea of Zionism as a manifestation of Jewish nationality and not as a manifestation of a Jewish religion is something that is not part of the language they use. So again, you first have to decide what Zionism, and then you have to look at different parties and decide if there are Zionists. When it comes to classic Zionism, I'd say the Arab parties and at least one of the Haredi parties, the Ashkenazi Haredi party, these aren't Zionists. And then you have members of Knesset here and there on the far left who might also be not Zionist.
Thank you, Shmuel. I'll now hand over to Steve Liblich. Steve, just unmute there. There you go, perfect.
Okay, thanks, Joel, and thanks, Shmuel, for your analysis. I'd like to also ask about the development in the Arab candidates. I see the Ram party as a positive development in that they apparently are focused now on winning some civil benefits for their own constituents and put aside the traditional Arab support for the Palestinian cause and so on. I see that as positive. On the other hand, they are ideologically a Muslim Brotherhood party, and even though their leader Mansour Abbas has spoken against targeting civilians, I'm concerned that there's potentially some subversive motivations there. So I'd be interested in your comments on that, Shmuel.
So the surprising fact about Ram, the Islamist party, is that more than anything else, it reminds me of the ultra-Orthodox Haredi parties. It is a party representing a certain section of Arab society. This is a highly conservative section, very religious, very conservative on family values, gay rights, all these things, state religion affairs. On all these matters, it's very easy for Ram, the Islamist party, to find common language with the most conservative parts of the Netanyahu coalition. This is a religious party representing the interests of religious voters, and it does introduce a dramatic change from the past. It's a party that says, much like the Haredi parties, we have our constituents. They need schools, they need benefits, they need healthcare, they need roads, They need all the benefits that we can get as we gain political power. And we are going to work for our voters the same way other parties who represent certain sectors work to benefit their own voters. So again, is it a blessing? I think that the overall tendency of our voters to begin thinking about their own interests rather than being a rather marginal part of Israel's political arena because they basically represent the interests of foreign nations or foreign groups. They represent the interests of the Palestinians or oppose. Imagine that they oppose peace agreements between Israel and Arab nations and the Gulf states because it doesn't, they think it hurts the Palestinians that Israel has peace with other Arab nations. So for Arab Israeli voters to begin considering the option of playing the political game as it is played in Israel, that's an important factor. However, for Israelis whose tendency is more progressive, liberal, the extra 5% of voters who now turn to highly conservative Arab Party, in addition to the 20% of voters who voted for highly conservative Jewish parties, that's a factor. You have 25% or 23% of the Knesset now who oppose certain aspects of gay rights. That's the way it is. Because again, if you add up the two Haredi parties and the religious Zionist party and Ra'am as an addition to the conservative chorus, then you have a clear block of conservative voices that can speak in unison, at least on some of the issues. So these are the two sides of the same coin.
It's truly fascinating. Thank you again for that answer. I'll now hand over to Dr. Ran Porat.
Shalom, Shmuel. Thank you for that presentation. I'm a bit confused because if you look at the election results, you see a lot of different parties and only one big party, one medium. And previous elections, we've seen more two big parties and less small parties. So, and you argue in your presentation that there's no real ideological differences between the parties, and in many aspects, Israelis agree on many topics. So my question to you is the understanding or the perception from outside Israel that the Israeli society is divided, possibly because of Netanyahu and other factors. Is it a misconception? So is the Israeli society divided or not?
I think it's psychologically divided. Ideologically, it's not divided, and that's something that's hard to wrap your head around. Not just as an observer from afar, it's also difficult for Israelis to recognize that on most issues they basically agree. If you look at the parties today, don't even have platform, but if you look at the imaginary platforms of parties such as Likud, Yamina, Tikva Chadasha, Yesh Atid, Blue and White, Israel Beiteinu to some extent, and even parts of labor, the differences, there are some differences, but again, look at the main issues, there aren't many differences. Most of the debates are personal. You ask, why do we have so many parties? Because we have nothing else to talk about other than who's going to be prime minister, because we agree on everything else. So everyone wants to be prime minister. There's no coalescing of two main blocks around two different main ideas. The idea that one party is, pushing the idea of socialism and universalism, and the other party pushing the idea of tribalism and capitalism. That's not the case. on most of these issues with minor differences. It's no problem for Lapid to sit in a coalition with a Netanyahu-like person, not Netanyahu himself because of his personality, but with a Likud leader other than Netanyahu, Lapid could easily form a coalition. Same goes for Benny Gantz, same goes for Naftali Bennett, same goes for Gideon Sa'ar, and these are the main parties. So again, because of the psychology of it, because we go through so many rounds of election, the rhetoric becomes harsh and people are angry with each other and all that. But if you look at ideological differences, they are truly minor.
Thank you for that, Shmuel. I'll now hand over to Anthony Cohen.
Thank you, Shmuel. You've made a very good case for the fact that Israel is virtually, in terms of voting, 2-1 from the right to the left. And in such circumstances, with Likud being very much the largest party, you would think that if they were in power or got elected, they would probably be in for about another 12 years. Do you think there's a temptation, any possible temptation within Likud to actually take the issue on and choose another leader?
I think all leaders except Netanyahu would love to replace him and choose someone else, preferably themselves. But they are afraid because he is a very dominant figure. He has many followers, and if they try to unseat him, look, this is what Gideon Sa'ar tried to do a year and a half ago. He tried doing this, was defeated by Netanyahu, and ultimately found his way out of the party because Netanyahu would not let him stick around after being challenged by him. Netanyahu, say what you want about his character and his many faults, but he's a very shrewd politician and he's very good at politically surviving, which is the prerequisite for being prime minister for so many years. It's not a coincidence that no one challenged him up until now within Likud in a serious way. It's because he knows what to do. He knows how to move the pieces around in such a way that no one is in a position to threaten him within the Likud Party. I think it will ultimately be up to the voters to unseat Netanyahu and not up to internal infighting within Likud. I should also mention that the Likud Party has a very long history in which no prime minister was removed by his own colleagues. Menachem Begin ruled the party for a few decades, failed time and again in elections, but was still kept as the head of the party until he decided to retire. Same goes for his successor, Yitzhak Shamir. The Likud Party is at its core very loyal to its leaders. It's not some, they do not remove their own leaders until these leaders are defeated and decide to retire.
Thank you, Shmuel. Before we hand over to Aaron, we have a little bit of time for a question or two. I have another question in the chat. It's in two parts again, but it relates to the recent good faith involvement in the political process of the new Arab parties. And the question is that a result or a consequence of the Abraham Accords with the UAE and other Sunni Arab countries? And is there the possibility of internal reapproachment between Arab parties and Zionist ones internally akin to the external peace?
Well, these are questions on which we can spend the next 2 hours talking. Arab parties and Arab Israelis are torn between their sense of kinship to other Palestinians who are not Israeli citizens, and also in some sense to the outer Arab world. On the other hand, almost all of them, and we know this from recent years from many studies, they are very proud to be Israelis. They want to stay as Israelis. Arab Israelis do not want to become Palestinian citizens in a newly created Palestine. They want to be a part of Israel. Will a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict make it easier for them to be a part of the larger Israeli conversation? That's a possibility, but also there is the opposite possibility that once there is a Palestinian state, the Jewish majority will have less patience for Arab Israelis because they have, so to speak, they have an alternative. I don't think we can answer this question with great certainty at this point, and I don't think we are at the verge of achieving any long-term peace with the Palestinians. So this is very much a theoretical question, and what we see for now, the trend that we see towards more involvement of Arab Israelis in Israeli politics is certainly a change for the better, and hopefully this will help first Jews and Arabs in Israel to live together in a calmer and more and better way, and possibly also will contribute to the easing of tensions in the whole of the region, and maybe ultimately to easing of tensions between Israel and the Palestinians as well.
Thank you, Shmuel. Now I'll hand over to AIJAC's Aaron Shapiro.
Yes, hi, Shmuel. I wanted to talk about some of the other parties that were challenging in this election. We saw Naftali Bennett was polling over 20 seats for a long time, many months until Gideon Sa'ar launched his party. And instead of drawing from the Likud, they seemed to draw off each other, and eventually they both came down. And some of the other parties on the left especially seemed to benefit from that. And the Labor Party, which was seen at the beginning of the process as in its death throes, seems to have a great revival. Do you have anything to say about these developments and why both Bennett and Sa'ar seem to sink so much towards the end?
The simplest answer is that taking voters away from Likud is not as easy as it seems. Most Likud voters have a long tradition of voting for this party. Likud, it could be an annoying political party, but it's a real party. They have people going with some people are going with Likud back to their parents and grandparents. They are Likud voter to their core. So taking away voters from Likud is just, it's difficult. And as soon as it became clear that Bennett and Sa'ar cannot create this dramatic alteration of the whole political map, people began walking back to their old habits. So instead of saying, okay, we will vote for Sa'ar because this will change the political map, in some fashion, the same way Ariel Sharon did it almost 2 decades ago when he formed Kadima. Ariel Sharon once did this great thing of breaking the whole two-party system and coming forward with a third party that became the ruling party for Israel. Other than that, all other attempts failed. And when Sa'ar and Bennett started losing people, voters more to the center, to the left said, okay, there's an earthquake is not going to happen here, a political earthquake. So we might as well go back and support our own niche parties and give them the votes they need to cross the threshold. That's why both Labor and Meretz and blue and white recovered at the last minute and gained so many seats because people just felt, okay, it's going to be a mess anyway. So at least we can vote for the parties that we support on a more sentimental level.
Thank you, Shmuel. Now, the final question, I'll hand over to AIJAC's Jeremy Jones.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been a wonderful presentation, and you referred at one stage to the difference between the psychological and the ideological. And I have I'm not sure if it's two questions or in two parts. One, you've done a lot of work on the Israel-diaspora relationship, and there's a lot of psychological elements to this. And the first part of my question is how you think the Israeli election, it will affect or is likely to affect the relationship between Israel and the main diaspora communities. And the second question is, we in the diaspora are very interested in what goes on in Israel, at least in the Australian diaspora. And we've seen in the last 2 years, 4 inconclusive elections, more than 6,000 Israelis tragically dying from COVID, 139 days of lockdown. We've seen the Abraham Accords, a change of the US presidency and the emotions that causes in Israel. And so we're really curious, what is the mood of Israel? What is Israel's mood, as we say to you, Moadim Simcha?
Okay, so to your first question, well, let me answer this. No, I'll answer the first question first. The Israel diaspora relations are not directly affected by these rounds of election. I think the Israel diaspora relations are affected in the last year and a half more than anything else by COVID. The fact that people can no longer travel, youth groups, birthright, all these things that just stopped. This is the main factor that impacts Israel's relations with other Jewish communities in the world. Now, will there be people in certain communities who dislike Israel because of election outcomes or like Israel because of election outcomes? I assume it's a factor, but I always tend to be suspicious of people who believe that the political situation in Israel is the one that make other people, like or dislike Israel. I think it's much more about gut feeling, about education, about connection to Judaism overall. And the political arena is mostly more an excuse than a reason to like or dislike Israel. Again, if something impacts the relations for now, it's COVID. Hopefully, as soon as possible, if COVID is over, then we can go back to having our usual business. And, again, this is one of the things in which I say, maybe it's good not to have an active government. I'm not sure the government contributes much to the relations. Maybe without it, we'll just do better. So that's one thing. As for the mood, it depends whom you ask. There are people who are highly involved in political issues and feel very strongly about politics. And these people are probably frustrated on one side or the other of the equation. But it's also springtime and it's Pesach, and people are going in great numbers to the nature and to museums. And I don't think we should overstate the dramatic nature of our situation. Again, there are, we do hear dark jokes about Israel. We do see people who say nasty things about our situation. But all in all, life is not that bad in Israel. The economic situation is not terrible. It's not great for many Israelis, but it's not terrible. Again, with the vaccines, we did very well. People can go back to their old lives. They could sit to the Seder with the extended family. The mood is not great, but it's okay. And one proof is that the happiness index of the UN, I think, that was published just last week, Israel again came, I think, at the 11 or 12 of all countries in the world. So, you know, until we decline to I don't know, 35th place or 112th place, you know, it's good enough for me. 11th place, that's good enough for me.
And on that happy note, I'd like, on behalf of AIJAC, to thank you, Shmuel, for a fantastic webinar. You covered a hell of a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. And I have no doubt that the audience gained a lot from the fascinating presentation. So I thank you on behalf of AIJAC again. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for tonight. Please keep a lookout in your inboxes for the next webinar invitation, which will be there shortly. And until then, Chag Pesach Sameach, signing off, and we'll see you next time.